Hey guys, Hackersploit here. Welcome back to the Red Team training series. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Red Team persistence techniques. And now that we've essentially explored reconnaissance as well as initial exploitation, and we've essentially set up our C2 server, we're going to be taking a look at how to set up persistence with Empire, right? Primarily because that is our C2 server of choice. But in regards to what we'll be covering in this video, we'll start off by getting an understanding of what persistence is and why it's so important. We'll then talk about the various Empire persistence modules available and how they can be utilized based on specific factors. And then we'll take a look at the practical aspect of the video, which will deal with setting up persistence with Empire. Right, so what exactly is persistence? Well, based on the definition provided to us on the Mitre attack website, persistence essentially consists of techniques that adversaries use to keep access to systems across restarts, changed credentials, and other interruptions that could cut off their access. Techniques used for persistence include any access action or configuration changes that let them maintain their foothold on systems, such as replacing or hijacking legitimate code or adding startup code. Right, so this is a very important aspect of the Red Team lifecycle, or the adversary lifecycle, if you will, because gaining access to a system is simply not enough, or gaining an initial foothold is not enough. The reason this is the case is primarily because when you're dealing with an environment or a target that you don't have control of, you don't know what they're going to do to the target system, or you don't know how they utilize their target systems. And in this case, we have essentially been able to exploit or to gain an initial foothold on an employee system or an employee computer, right? And it's very likely that at the end of their workday, they're going to turn off their PC, and that means that our initial foothold, we will actually lose that foothold, right? Because we haven't set up persistence. So it's very important that you learn how to set up and maintain persistent access to your target. So whenever they actually power on or reboot their system, we get our foothold back, or we get our agent back, right? And again, this may seem like a step that you'll probably skip whenever you're dealing with CTFs or penetration tests, primarily because you're not required to maintain access over a long period of time, and that's really not within your objectives. But in regards to red teaming, it's always important that you maintain access to your agents, so that you can always go back, assess them, and exfiltrate data, so on and so forth. That being said, if we take a look at the Mitre attack persistence techniques, or the actual tactic and its techniques, there are a few key persistence techniques that we're going to be exploring, right? And of course, one of them is going to be persistence through the Windows registry. We also have persistence through scheduled tasks. We can also create a local user account, and we'll also explore backdoors to a certain extent. Now, it's very important to note that some persistence techniques will require an agent with elevated privileges. However, we can also set up persistence via an unprivileged agent, right? And that's very important because our initial foothold in regards to our scenario here is an unprivileged agent, and that means that we can only do so much in regards to modifying operating system code or interacting with the registry, so on and so forth. Now, when it comes down to the persistence modules available for Empire, they're typically split up into 1 or 4 categories based on how they work and how they should be utilized, and under what parameters they can be utilized. And in this case, we're going to be focusing on three persistence modules, or 3 categories of persistence modules. The first one is userland persistence, and this is very much relative to our particular case or our scenario, in that persistence or userland persistence modules are used to set up reboot persistence for a non-privileged agent, also known as userland, right? So that's essentially what they're used for. We also have elevated persistence modules, which are used to set up reboot persistence for agents with administrative privileges, right? And of course, that's very different because you have more access and you can do much more. And then, of course, you have the PowerBreach modules, which are a series of in-memory PowerShell backdoors that can be used to set up persistence as well through various techniques like creating a user backdoor, so on and so forth. And we'll explore all of this. Right, that being said, that's pretty much all that I wanted to make clear in regards to the theory for this video. Let's get started. I'll see you back on my Kali VM, and we can actually get started with setting up persistence. Alright, so I'm back on my Kali VM, and I have my Empire server running as well as my Empire client, and I also have Starkiller set up. So we're going to be again switching between Starkiller and Empire client just to show you that they can be used interchangeably, although the Empire client is much more stable in regards to executing certain modules. However, there are a few things that I wanted to take you through in regards to the Starkiller GUI, or the interface rather. And that is pertaining particularly to the agents, right? And within the agents screen, you have the ability to hide stale agents. So what is a stale agent? A stale agent is an agent that's not pinged back, or that's not actually connected back for whatever reason. It could be that that the client or the target has actually shut down the connection, or it got shut down by an anti-malware service like Windows Defender, or it could be that the security analysts have actually turned it down or have terminated that process. And again, one reason for that is primarily because you didn't have persistence. Otherwise, you'd have got the agent callback. So you have the ability to hide stale ones, which is quite helpful because you'll have quite a few stale agents over time. The other aspect that I wanted to highlight here is the ability to customize the categories displayed in terms of information for a particular agent. You can customize that by clicking on this little option here, this little option menu. And you have the ability to either enable you can either display each of these categories or any one of them. So you can display all of the categories here. And this is information pertinent to your particular agent. So you can display the host name of the agent, the process ID, architecture, language version, working hours. Working hours is something that you'll pretty much obtain by monitoring and analyzing the activity of the agent, like when the agent is turned on based on the office working hours, etc. You can also display the external IP if this is an external facing host or client. You can also display the delay and jitter. So for example, if I hit save here, you can see the delay is 5 seconds, and I can get rid of that, and I just hit save and it displays the information that's important to me. Now, when it comes down to agents, and of course, in this particular case, we're only working with one agent, so it's fairly simple to understand what's going on. It can be quite cumbersome to manage a whole list of agents with their generic name that has been assigned by Empire. So we need to actually change that. Now, there's multiple ways you can go about changing this. One of the ways is by using Starkiller, clicking on the agent name, and then clicking on view. And within the name field here, you can see there's a text box. We can actually customize this based on its purpose, function, or who utilizes it within the target organization. So for example, let's say we have compromised the marketing, one of the marketing representatives' computers. So we can say marketing rep, right? And we can rename it so that we can easily identify it later. And the name has to be alphanumeric. So marketing rep, and you just click outside of that and you can see name has been updated. So if I click on agents, it's now going to say marketing rep, and the same is going to be reflected within the Empire client. So again, if I say agents, you can see we have marketing rep there. And again, it displays the same table of information that you have in Starkiller. Right, now when it comes down to agents and whether or not your agent is a high integrity agent, and when I'm speaking about high integrity agents, what I'm essentially referring to is whether this agent is privileged or unprivileged. In our case, we know that the agent is unprivileged, and we can verify this by of course displaying we can interact with this particular agent. So we say marketing rep, and then we list out the information for this particular agent. So I hit enter. And you can see right over here, as one of the agent options, it's going to say high integrity, right? And again, as I said, high integrity means, or essentially refers to whether this is a privileged or unprivileged agent. If it's set to 0, that means false, so it's not a high integrity agent. If it's set to 1, that means it is a high integrity agent. Furthermore, whenever you display your agents, you will have an asterisk appended, or an asterisk will be appended to the name of the agent if it is privileged or if it is a high integrity agent. So that's always a quick way of identifying your systems based on privileges. Now, again, as I said within the slides, we're going to explore both userland persistence modules and of course privileged persistence modules, and in our particular case we only have one agent and it's currently not a high integrity agent. So the first logical step would be to get a second agent, on the same target system as a high privileged agent, and we can do this through a multitude of techniques. But one of the techniques we're going to take a look at is through the use of the PowerShell framework or the PowerShell tool PowerUp, right? So PowerUp is a fairly simple module to utilize, and I would recommend utilizing it or running it from the Empire client, primarily because Starkiller, I've had issues with this particular module with Starkiller. But so again, what I'll do is let me just clear up my screen here. If I interact with the marketing rep PC, and I can then use the module, and again, the module is fairly simple to understand. If I just say use module and then I can search for it here, PowerUp, you can see PowerShell Privesc PowerUp all checks. What this will do is it'll run a series of checks that are pertinent to privilege escalation. And of course, given the fact that we're dealing with a Windows 10 target, we are going to have very limited techniques that we can utilize out of the box. We're not yet going to take a look at privilege escalation. We're simply trying to obtain somewhat of a, an elevated state on the target. So we can utilize the first module there, and we hit enter. And now we can customize the module options. So the module options, if you only have one agent, it's going to set that agent as the value here for the name of the agent. And you can also set the output function, the PowerShell output function, from outString, which is simply going to display output in the form of a string. You can also convert it to CSV, convert to XML, convert to HTML, so on and so forth. Right, so all that you need to do now is simply hit execute. And again, it really is very, very simple. And we can just hit execute here. And we hit enter, and it's going to again task marketing rep to run task 1, which is going to run the module. So I'm just going to wait for this particular module to run. In the meantime, I'm just going to interact with the agent itself, marketing rep. There we are. And let's see whether you can see task 1 results received. Let's actually see whether we can obtain the results from PowerUp. All right, so PowerUp does provide us with the results within the Empire client terminal interface, and you can actually see that here. So we'll just go through all the checks that it runs. So you can see running invoke all checks, checking if a user is in local group with administrative privileges. We can see that the user is in a local group that grants administrative privileges, which is great. So that means that this user is part of the admin group on Windows. It's going to tell us to run bypass user access control attack to elevate privileges to admin. So we'll actually do that. It's then going to check for common privilege escalation attack vectors on Windows, which is in this case, number 1, it checks for unquoted service paths. It'll also check the service executable and argument permissions to identify a few vulnerabilities there. It'll also check for hijackable DLL locations that we can actually utilize, and that's where we can use stages, or we can generate stages like Windows DLL and perform DLL hijacking that way for certain programs that are missing DLLs, right? It'll also check always install elevated, auto logon credentials, modifiable registry autoruns and configs, modifiable scheduled tasks, checking for unattended install files. That's interesting. We find the unattended path here. Now the unattended install files, or rather the unattended install on Windows, is a fantastic system or utility that is utilized by administrators to install Windows on a large number of workstations unattended, right? So what that means is that they need to pre-configure the passwords for the users that they're creating on the systems, and they specify that within a configuration file, so unattend.xml, so we can potentially find credentials within that file. It'll also check for, it'll also perform password searches here to identify any plain text passwords. And then of course I just ran an additional command here to essentially ensure that I still have communication, or I still have contact with the target, and that was just ipconfig. That being said, we can now utilize the technique that it actually recommends, which is bypass UAC to elevate our privileges to admin. So we will again say use module, and we can search for it here, bypass UAC, and we're looking for the first one here, PowerShell Privesc bypass UAC. We hit enter. The options we need to change are going to be whether we want any bypasses. The listener, we can use the HTTP listener. We can also obfuscate if we want, but as I said, we're not exploring obfuscation right now. We'll explore it in future videos. And yeah, the only option we need to set in this case is the listener. So we're going to say set listener to HTTP. So that's the HTTP listener we set up earlier. And then once we're ready to go, all we need to do is hit execute. So I'm just going to run that. So execute, hit enter, and that's going to task marketing rep to run task 3. And you can also check the tasks running on the Empire server terminal interface. So you can see it's going to give you a list of tasks that are being running or that have actually been run. So I'm going to give this a few seconds, and then we'll check the output to see whether that was successful. All right, so it looks like that was successful because we received a second agent that is going to be a high integrity agent that checked in. So if we go to Starkiller and we check our agents, we can see we have the high privileged or high integrity agent. So if you highlight over that, you can see that if it is a high integrity agent, it's going to have this little icon with a cog, or this little person with a cog here, and that's going to say elevated process. So again, remember, it's the same target, but with an elevated session. So you can actually see that the process ID is different. The process it utilizes is different. It's using PowerShell. And again, everything else is pretty much the same, although now it is in an elevated state. So we can rename it. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to say marketing rep. We're going to say marketing rep high, or we can just say marketing rep privileged or marketing privileged. Let's just keep it simple. Again, you can rename it to whatever is comfortable for you. Again, if we go back to agents, you can see marketing privileged. And now we can begin the persistence techniques, because we'll take a look at how to set up persistence for both of these agents, so that even if the system is rebooted, we will get back these agents, or they'll connect back when the system is rebooted, or they will essentially get back a connection whenever we set our scripts to execute at a certain time. All right, so let's move on to persistence now. All right, so let's get started with the userland persistence modules for our unprivileged or our unprivileged agent, which is just the marketing rep agent here. So we'll head back into the Empire terminal, or the Empire client terminal, and we'll go back. We'll take a step back here, and we're currently within the marketing rep agent, so we are currently interacting with it. So let me just display that again. We can now see, as I mentioned before, there will be an asterisk for the privileged agent. And right, so what we can do is we can say interact, and then we say marketing rep, and again it'll display the output from power up, but in this case we're going to use a new module. So we're going to say use module, and we are going to start off with the persistence module pertaining to the registry, right, or the registry key. So again, I'm just going to locate it. So persistence, we can search for persistence modules. And we are then looking for the userland registry module. So you can see there's a difference between elevated and userland modules. So we can click on userland and registry, hit enter. There are a few options that we need to configure, of course. Very important one. Number one, we can see that we can provide an alternate data stream location. We also have the default agent, which is set correctly to marketing rep. Any bypasses, the cleanup switch if you want, the external file for the payload instead of a stager. We're going to utilize a stager. Now the key name option, this is very important, right? This is the key name for the run trigger. Now, when it comes down to registry keys, I just wanted to explain one thing. We have the run and run once registry keys here. Now, run and run once registry keys cause programs to run each time that the user logs on. The data value for a key is a command line no longer than 260 characters. Register programs to run by adding entries of the form description, string, command line. You can write multiple entries under a key. If more than one program is registered under a particular key, the order in which these programs run is indeterminate. So we can utilize the following registry, the registry keys rather, or the following registry entries here, and because we want to set up persistence for the current user, we're going to say HKCU or current user, HKey current user as it were, and again software Microsoft Windows current version run. Now we need to specify the key name. The key name should be as clandestine as possible so that the blue team can detect it. So in our case, we can leave it as updater, or we can change it. Alternatively, we can also set it to Empire so that we can actually verify that it has been added. But in our case, we'll leave it as updater. We then need to set the listener, right? The listener is very, very important here. So we're going to set the listener first. The listener we'll use the HTTP listener we set up because it's working very well. And you can also use the HTTP hop listener, which is great. Although I'll probably make another video covering how to use that, because that allows you to proxy traffic really well. We also need to set the registry path, right? Now you can see it's currently set to debug. We want to set that to run. So software Microsoft Windows current version run. And we're going to use the HKey current user. So again, we can also use the HKey local machine if we want. That'll work just as well. So again, we can just copy that depending on the type of persistence you want to set up. In our case, let's just set the registry path. So reg path, let me type that in. There we are. So we're going to say HKLM, HKey local machine, and then we can paste in what we had copied. So we're going to say software Microsoft Windows current version run. Let me just get rid of that there. And yeah, so what will happen is that when we're setting this particular registry key, this will cause the script to run for any user that logs in instead of the current user, which again is great. And again, I'm using this option because it's the most comprehensive out of all the others. Now, as I said, this persistence method or technique isn't the recommended technique, because again, you're working with the registry. There's a lot of logging for the registry. So again, in our case, we're just using it just so that I can demonstrate how this works. That being said, once that is done, we can then just hit execute and we hit enter, and that's going to run it. So again, I'm just going to let this run. All right, so I ran the persistence module with the options that I specified for the local machine, but it looked like that didn't work. So I ran the same module under HK current user, software Microsoft Windows current version run, and I've just run a registry query for the same run key just to see whether that particular let me actually open that up. Let me just show you this here. We can also do it using Starkiller. So again, if I say persistence and we locate the userland registry, yeah, so again, the key name I utilized there was Empire. So that's the key name for the trigger. So again, if I just display the tasks here, hopefully it actually loads up so that I can actually take you through this right now. It doesn't look like that's working. Let me just check the file browser here. Can we, I think there's a module that can actually display certain registry keys that I want to actually view. If we say, for example, let me just clear that out. Let's just say registry, just to verify that that is the case. So there we are. Let's see, C#, sharpsploit, enumeration set, registry key. No, we want to get a registry key here. HKey current user, or HKey, yep, that's the correct one there. And then of course we utilized software. We of course utilized this one here, so we can just copy that, even though there isn't much of a change there. So I'll just paste that in there. And let me just correct that, and hopefully this will display that particular registry key. The C# server is not running, so let me just start that there. Plugins, C# server, and let's start that. So I'm just going to wait for this to start up. While the C# server is actually starting up, we can actually use the shell on the marketing rep PC, and I'm just going to query that particular one. So register reg query, and we'll just try and identify whether that has actually provided any output. There we are. You can see that we added the Empire run. There we are, and that's going to execute PowerShell. And we have that done correctly. So now we have been able to set up persistence for this currently user, and of course we're working from an unprivileged state. We also have the updater one, which seems like it worked because I set it, although the registry location doesn't seem to have the backslashes there. There's probably an issue with the way I passed in the options within the module options. But in any case, we have the Empire. We can see Empire there, and of course you can also run it through Starkiller. So again, if we head over to agents, what I did was I used the same persistence module. So again, you can locate it here, userland registry. Well, actually, there it is. That's the module there. And I set the key name to Empire, and I simply changed it to HKCU, current user, and then run, right? And that seems to have set up correctly. So let's move on to the next persistence technique pertaining to the userland modules. And we can actually utilize Starkiller. We can alternate between the two. So yeah, let's take a look at the next technique. All right, so the next persistence technique is through scheduled tasks. And of course, this is a userland module. So we'll utilize Starkiller. I'm just going to refresh my agents there. Marketing rep, there we go, and I'm just going to look for it here. So SCH tasks, and you can see we have the userland module, not the elevated module, but the userland module. So I'm going to specify or click on that. The task name, again, I'm just going to call it Empire just to keep things nice and simple, and then we'll use a different one for the elevated or high integrity agent. We can provide the daily time when we want the script to be triggered, so in hours and minutes. So again, this will play into the agent's working hours, or the hours when the agent is actually on, so you can get back an agent at that time whenever the script is triggered. You can also set up the idle time in minutes to trigger the script. You can also use an external file for the payload instead of the stager. The listener will utilize HTTP. We don't want to obfuscate, as I mentioned. We're not going to use that right now. Yeah, and that's pretty much it in regards to the options. The registry key path that we can utilize again can follow the same one we utilized. So for example, we can use the HKey current user and the run or run once registry keys, but we want the run registry key. So let me just head back into Starkiller, and we can just change this to run. I believe that is the same command there. Just to be sure, we can actually just paste that in there. There we are. And I'll just get rid of that extra backslash, and we simply hit submit. All right, so that is going to be queued for execution. So again, I'm just going to wait for that to complete execution, and let's see whether that actually did it correctly as a scheduled task, right? So again, just going to wait for that to complete. You can actually click on marketing rep. For some reason, I've not been getting any output displayed here within my output pane. But we'll probably have to see whether we can actually pop that out here. So agent marketing rep, let's see whether that actually works out here. If I bring that over here, does that work out? No, it doesn't work out, but probably can interact the same way with, we can interact the same way with the Empire client. That being said, we can also take a look at a few options that I haven't covered with Empire, and that, or with Starkiller rather, and that is the ability to upload or download files to the target, and we'll be exploring that as we move along when we'll be talking about exfiltration. Of course, this is not a valid technique for exfiltrating data. We want to always create a staging directory and stage the files that we're interested in. So again, let me just check whether this has been executed successfully. All right, so I'm currently within the Empire client terminal, and you can see it's going to say when I interacted with the agent, task 12 results received, success, the scheduled task Empire has successfully been created, scheduled tasks, persistence established using listener HTTP stored in HKey current user, etc. under the run key with the Empire daily trigger at 9 a.m. Right, so that is how to use scheduled tasks for persistence. Now, let's talk about the privileged agent here, or the high integrity agent. If we interact with the high integrity agent, there we are, and we say marketing privileged, and what we'll do is I'll just display the info here. You can see that indeed it is a high integrity agent because the value is now set to 1 instead of 0, which means we can pretty much run other modules that we couldn't before. And let's explore some of these modules. So again, we can pretty much run the same persistence techniques that we did for the unprivileged agent, which was through the Windows registry or the scheduled tasks, or through creating a scheduled task. In this case, we can also do it through the through a scheduled task or the registry, but in an elevated sense. So again, it's the same process, or the same process repeats itself. So we can click on marketing privileged here. We can then search for the module. So we can search for persistence, and now you can see we're going to have the elevated module. So we're going to have WMI updater, scheduled tasks, registry, RID hijack, and then of course we have the userland ones, which are just 2, right? So in this particular case, because we've already explored the registry and scheduled tasks module, let's take a look at the WMI module. So what this module will do, let me find it, there we are. What this module will do is it'll essentially configure a permanent WMI subscription to fire the started script logic. And then of course you have a time when the script will be executed, or you can also set it to run on system startup. So again, we'll set this up there, and we'll provide it with a name. We'll just call it WMI, right? And at startup can be set to true. We can also set a daily time to trigger the script. If we're setting the, if we are using the at startup option here, or the at startup option switch, again, the trigger script will be executed within 5 minutes, or the script will be executed within 5 minutes of system startup. You can also provide an external file instead of the payload, as I mentioned. Trigger the script with a failed logon attempt from a specific user. This can be used when you're trying to actually get it to execute by authenticating yourself, either through RDP or any other technique, so that you can get the agent back. But in this case, this looks fine. So I'm just going to hit submit, and again, I'm just going to wait for this to be executed. All right, so interacting with the marketing privileged agent reveals that WMI persistence is established using a listener HTTP on startup WMI subscription trigger, right? So that looks like it was successful. Disregard this particular task. This was just a check using Starkiller for the current directory. So again, this is essentially what I was doing. That being said, we can actually again take a look at one more technique. That of course is going to be based on your current working environment and the target infrastructure. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to restart the target system, and let's see whether we actually get our agents back, or we get a call back, essentially verifying that the persistence techniques were legitimate. All right, so the next technique that I'm going to highlight will essentially deal with creating local user accounts as a means of persistence or maintaining some form of access. Although, as I said, this is not recommended if you're working in an environment that's constantly being monitored. So again, this will depend on the environment that you're dealing with. And again, we'll also take a look at how to set up a backdoor for a particular user. So what we'll do is we'll work with the privileged agent here, and I can then search for it here, persistence, and we're looking for the module that allows us to add a user. We'll also take a look at dead user, but we can take a look at add net user here. And you can also display the actual technique for this particular module on the Mitre website here. So you can see system owner, user discovery, adversaries may attempt to identify the primary user, currently logged in user, etc. And then of course it provides us with the technique ID, which again will provide us with an idea of what this particular module does. So what we can do is if we search for T1033, let's see what that does. This is always good to actually go through that. T1033, let's actually search for that. I can actually find that here. Let's head over to the matrix here. T1033, right? We're currently within persistence. If we click on account manipulation, T1033, can we take a look at account manipulation? There we have the sub techniques, and we are essentially working on creating another user account here. Let's see if I can identify that just through this. There we are, create account. Although that's not the correct technique, but again, this process essentially involves create an account to maintain access to victim systems, right? So let's head over back to Starkiller. So there we are, miscellaneous, add net user, the computer name, host name to add the local user to, the domain, the specified domain to add the user to, the group name, which is administrators, and then the password for that particular user, and of course the backdoor, the username, which in this case is set to backdoor, which I don't recommend. If we head over to agents, we can see that the host name is MS-Edge Win10 there. So again, if I click on that there, and then we search for add user, if I can find it, there we are. And again, the local host name we provide, we don't have a domain here because we're not dealing with domains or Active Directory. The group name, administrators, that is correct. There's the administrators group. And then we provide a password, and we can call this Empire. Let's see if this works. All right, so that's been queued for execution. The other module that I wanted to highlight here was the process of creating a backdoor for a user. And you can use that using the PowerBreach module that I highlighted within the slide. So PowerBreach dead user. What this module will do is it'll set up a script that will provide you with an agent if a particular user is deleted. Like for example, we created our Empire user, and we can then set up the dead user script here to actually provide us with an agent, or essentially execute a script that'll provide us with an agent sort of similar to a backdoor when the Empire user is deleted, right? And we'll get to this in a second. Before we do that, I just want to make sure that the Empire user has been created. And as I said, that's not something I recommend doing. I'm just highlighting various techniques here. All right, so I'm back on the client here, and you can see that it essentially added the user for us, and we did that on the privileged agent for a reason. So now if we open up a shell session here and we say net user, let's see whether that actually will actually display that user for us. And you can see we have the Empire user there, and we can then log in to it through whatever technique, RDP or even SMB using PSExec if we wish to do that. And we can essentially authenticate. So we've added it, and it's part of the admin user or the administrators group, sorry. And yeah, so that's how to set up the user account. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not going to be using the dead user script or the dead user module because again, let me just display this to you. So we can actually take a look at how to set it up. So you set up your listener. That's for the agent to connect back to. You then have the sleep time. So this is the time in seconds to sleep between checks. So it'll check every 30 seconds whether that user has been deleted. If it exists, it will not run or trigger the script. If it's been deleted, it'll then trigger it. Now, in regards to the trigger of the script for the backdoor, or the in regards to the actual duration or timeout for the backdoor to be run, we can set it to 0 to run forever or almost immediately. The user account to check for existence is going to be Empire, and then we can specify a domain or an out file, right? So I'm not going to use this module because, again, in our case, it's not really necessary. But again, if you are setting up another user on the system and you want to have a backdoor for that user, you can do that as well. And yeah, those are pretty much all the techniques that I wanted to highlight at this point. As I said, these are not advanced techniques. They're typically exploiting Windows services like PowerShell or scheduled tasks. The next step now would be to restart the target system, and let's see whether we get our agents to actually connect back to us once the system is restarted. So again, we're moving now from our initial foothold to actually setting up persistence and now testing the persistence. So again, we're going to assume that the target has shut down or has restarted the system. So I'm going to restart the target system and let's see whether we get our agents back. All right, so I restarted the target system and I received the callback from in the form of agents, thanks to the various persistence techniques that we had set up, or the various modules that we had utilized. And you can see that we have 3 agents. Now, the reason we have 3 agents is because if you remember, when we were setting up persistence, we had set up or had used 2 userland modules for the unprivileged agent, which was persistence through the registry and persistence through scheduled tasks, which is why we actually received 2 unprivileged agents from the marketing rep agent here. And then we also set up persistence using the privileged persistence module WMI, that essentially again will provide us with a persistent elevated agent or a privileged agent, and you can see it right over here. Now, of course, as they reconnect, they're going to be under new names, and of course you can learn more about them. You can just click on them, change their name here, and every time the system restarts, they will ping back. So you need to be aware of that. And of course, we go back into our agents here. You can now see, for some reason, that is an elevated session. That's weird. We don't have any. If we hide the stale agents there, we can see our current ones, and their connection has been facilitated, or the process they're utilizing is PowerShell. And of course, you can take a look at their usernames here, and of course this indicates the user that they're currently using. We can see that these are indeed privileged. For some reason, this one, both of these look to be elevated or high integrity agents. In any case, you can see that the techniques we utilized or the modules we utilized worked. In addition to the modules that we utilized, we also set up another user on the system, a local user that's part of the admin group. And we set the username to Empire, and that can again provide us with access when we need it, if we need it. And of course, that can be utilized in a multitude of ways. Although, as I mentioned, that's not something that I would recommend doing in a highly secured or monitored environment. That being said, that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover in this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.